Definitely community meetings and you know, different situations where you can kind of learn about, you know, other issues that you're concerned about. You know, the colleges in your community, and kind of picking up on some of the news, checking out the website from Washington State Legislative, and kind of reading on bills that may be interesting to you, and kind of search different topics that way. We have an incentive room that has some new equipment in there, and kind of looking at doing videos and getting their take on different issues so they can feel empowered on more of like a social media network that we would put on like YouTube, and kind of create their own media network that we could shoot out to people that, if they're touching on the subject, that we can share with legislators.
Radio stations, you know, music stations, hip-hop stations, country stations, you name it, a lot of times they advocate issues on one side or the other based on what their what the heads of their corporations feel or believe, instead of putting out nonpartisan, truthful, really factual or fact-based information, and not sound bites that sound good or that get people really hooked. And I know that it's a marketing ploy to do those kinds of things. However, I think it's a huge disservice to the people, because a lot of people are caught up in their daily lives and they don't have the time to research those individual issues, to see what might be behind it, and to determine whether or not they really do or don't support it.
You know, if Kraft wants to sell us a new bag of chips, there's $1 million barrage that goes through to make sure it comes in front of us 14 times, and you know, we buy those chips and we eat them, and we think they're our favorites. But when it's something really important like children's health or education, or whether or not everybody in your community has a job, trying to do those campaigns is much, much harder, in part because Kraft has a much bigger budget than any municipality that we're part of.
Corporations and the federal level, you know, they have a lot of power, they have a lot of control of lots of news stations and radio stations and TV stations, and that filters its way down, but it's not truth, you know, and like it only works on people that really aren't thinking for themselves, you know. But then there's people that, you know, influence things, you know, just from the ground up, just people talking out on the street, and people talking at their meetings, and, you know, like local church leaders talking to their people, and street poets talking and things like that, and you know, that truth works its way up too, hopefully. And I mean, I see them both going on. It's definitely a battle, I would say.
We need to change the dialogue in the state and at the national level, and we have to see the blog posts, the newspaper posts, letters to the editor, calls to the radio as part of the way to change that dialogue. And I think that the scary part right now is really encouraging people to do that. So we often send templates for letters to the editor, templates for how to call your legislator or call the radio station. And have created our own blog. This is a way to really help influence the media dialogue through your own organization. Any organization or any coalition, for that matter, or individual could have a blog that could really help shape the dialogue about, you know, public policy. So it's been really influential, I think, for us to have more of a presence in the media. I think one of the things that we see with decreasing media outlets in this state and around the nation is the need to make sure more diverse voices are heard on those news outlets, and we have to be the ones to step up and do it. I think, you know, it's easy to think, oh, somebody else will write in about that nasty comment, but it's so important for us all to do that.
When I started the Message magazine, a lot of people were saying, well, you shouldn't really do print, you should focus on online, and I think that we're still in a position where print is very important, and I guess the advice that I would give is putting together your mock issue of what kind of things that you would like to talk about and what kind of things are going to be in there, and also to consider sustainability as far as where you would get revenue sources from, and how that works, and it could be even a nonprofit magazine, and that's something that we considered before, but it could also be as an independent media blog.
So thousands of bills were introduced this year and 300 were passed. There has to be a reason that each of these bills makes it past a hurdle. And in order for a legislator, I think, to give validity or an example to these bills or policy changes that they're considering, knowing specifically how it will affect families makes a huge difference. And this legislative session, they stood on the floor and read email after email after email about why programs were important to protect. So it really, I think, helps to put a face to an issue when they're dealing with so many issues at one time. Nobody ever marched on Capitol because of a pie chart. They have to really see how families and communities are affected to make change and want to take action. And I think that that's the same for us as advocates. We have to see the faces, the consequences of inaction or of a bad policy change, and to be able to put a face and numbers behind how many people are going to be affected. So it does matter to call. It does matter to email. I think it matters even more, if possible, to get your direct story to elected officials. And if that means going to city council or the school board or the legislature or working with partners to get individuals to DC, that matters. And for lack of transportation, making that call and email is just as important.
Lobbying is like when you walk into the state capitol and you educate somebody about something, right? The people you're educating happen to be like legislators, you know, but it's still the same thing. When you're doing popular education, you say it's popular education, it's a workshop, you know, or it's a training, right? If you're connecting with people in a real like heart-to-heart level, people who don't have an activist background or a language for like political and social change, you just say like, it's about connecting, you know, or being able to relate. Like, can you relate to me, you know? And then you're educating people. Like when you're trying to relate, you're educating people in your community.
The marches and the demonstrations aren't necessarily for the legislators. That's for the public. That's an organization or a group's way of getting the word out. I mean, that's what catches the media. That's what gets people's attention on the outside looking in is, okay, what are these people rallying about today? What are they, you know, what are they demonstrating about? And, you know, why is it important to them? It really educates those that are around them that wouldn't otherwise understand what was happening behind closed doors. The writing letters, the calling, the emailing, that kind of thing to the legislators is how they're actually going to affect the legislation and get involved. And so I think both ways, both processes are equally as important because you want to get the word out to the public. You want the public to know what it is that you're advocating for, and you know, in a professional and nonviolent way, so that they can back you and get behind you. But at the same time, you want the legislators to be on your side and to understand your issues and what's important. And so I think you get more support from people on the outside when you do those kinds of demonstrations. Sometimes you might lose support, but you know, I think that it's a good way to connect with the public. And then the other is a essential way of connecting with the legislators that are actually going to have that direct impact on the legislation.
Finding people that have done it before and kind of learning the ropes, because we can go to civics class, K through 12 all we want, but knowing how to go to your school board and present an issue and follow it through to it, and let alone to Olympia, and, you know, create a bill and follow it through to its end, or not. It's not, you know, democracy is as simple as showing up and speaking out, but following it through is a little bit more complex. You can teach it, but yeah, I think it's experience. And I think personally I would encourage people that even if they don't have that mentor or friend, just do it. You'll figure it out, because as you ask people along the way, they'll help you. I mean, even with adversity, even when I've brought issues to people that they didn't agree with, if I was asking questions about where to go next or how to do something, they were still going to tell me, because our elected officials and our government officials are the experts on the mechanics of our government, and they're not going to deny that to anybody.